Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Najdorf Sicilian, and more specifically, we're going to be taking a look at the lines that happen after the main line, Bishop G5, Najdorf Sicilian. We're going to be taking a deep dive into these lines, starting with this position. And if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So a big shout out to Memento Mori, who pointed out some of the tougher lines that white can try against some of the variations that I gave. And I'm going to try to go over all of those lines and also go over some alternatives and try to basically give you a verdict on this line and how you should try to play this with the black pieces and really what your best attempts are. So for starters right here, keep in mind that if you are a Najdorf player, it might do you a service to learn some alternatives here already. The move Queen C7 and Queen B6 are both possible here. And they're both very reasonable alternatives to the old main line. And from time to time, the old main line, the move Bishop to E7, does come into some problems, and it does come into disrepute. You need to be able to fluidly switch from kind of one line to another as the computers and as the engines come up with problems and as our analysis and understanding of these positions advance. So anyways, we're going to take a look at this main line with Bishop E7, or this old main line. And we're going to have Queen F3, Queen C7. We're going to have castles queenside, knight on B to D7, G4, B5 takes, and there's an alternative even here. You can play GF6 as possible, knight F6, G5, knight back to D7, F5. So now the two main moves here were always Bishop G5 and knight C5. Now knight C5 was Fischer's original choice in this position, and then eventually we didn't like that because knight C5 was having some problems, mainly in the Rook G1 lines, and we didn't really have a remedy for that. So then we switched back to bishop takes G5 check, and then it turned out that it was very easy for white to get a major advantage in those positions, and then eventually we found some resources in the knight C5 line. And now, of course, the knight C5 line is back out of favor again because we just there's problems again. So we'll go over that right now. So we're going to take a look at knight C5, F6 takes, bishop F8, and then Rook G1. So this was the move that really gave knight C5 a super hard time. Basically, the idea is white is going to pretty much play Rook G7 on this position regardless, and there's not a whole lot black can do about it. So black was having difficulties with making any kind of bishop move here, like bishop D7 or bishop B7 was a serious problem. Now the move that revived this line for black was eventually black just kind of played a waiting move. He played the move pawn to H5. Now, you have to understand why black plays this waiting move. It's based in a very firm general principle here, which is one of black's main goals in this position is he would be very pleased if he could somehow teleport this knight from C5 to E5. If we could pull off this maneuver at any point with, say, knight D7 to E5, black's position might not even be equal. It might actually be slightly better for black. You know, if we could make this move, if I could play knight C7, E5, everything in this position would be fine. So H5 is kind of keeping this in mind. We're trying to play H5 so they can't play Queen H5, and that makes this knight to E5 move even more potent and even more dangerous. So originally, when we started playing this move H5, everything was going great. People were playing Rook G7 in these positions. We were playing B4, knight D5, takes, and then this knight was fluidly shuffling to E5, and not only was black equalizing, black might even be better in these positions, and life was good. But then people started playing this move, pawn to A3. This is more of a modern move. This has really only come around in the last couple of years. Engines started finding this move, and Leela Chess Zero had a couple really good games with this move with the white pieces, and it's been giving black a lot of headaches. Now, to understand why, you have to kind of understand the ideas. So there's two things that are going on here. Number one, black is eventually trying to play knight to E5 at some point, trying to get this in, and white is trying to play the move knight D5 when it can be played with decisive force. Now, one of the things that black needs to try to do in this position is he needs to either try to trade off this knight before it can make it to the D5 square, and that'll be reasonable because it'll help. So if we could just magically take these two knights off the board, black's position would significantly improve because now knight D5 is no longer a possibility, and that should help us. Or if we can magically teleport this knight to the E5 square, that will help us as well. So one of the ways that black would try to do this is black would try to play B4 before there was anything on the E file that would make knight D5 a decisive move. And that's why rook g7 instead of a3 is kind of a lemon, because we don't want to play knight d5 in that exact position, because since there's no rook on e1, black's position is likely survivable, since after the exchange he can transfer the knight to e5 and everything should be fine. So here, one of the main frustrations is we can't play pawn to b4, and we would very much like to force this knight to d5 before we are ready. Now, the main move here was just basically the move rook to b8, and this was the original main move, and the idea is basically like if they play something lackadaisical, like king b1, we're going to continue with b4, a b4, rook b4, and we're getting plenty of play down the open p file, and life is good. And life was good for quite a while until people started playing rook e1. So basically here the idea is regardless, like almost against any move that black plays, white is going to now play the move knight d5, and he's going to play this move with serious force and some serious effect. So it's really difficult to actually meet this idea. So one idea that I had was, is it possible here to play knight a4? And interestingly enough, if I play knight a4 here, we are very, very close to equalizing, especially if they play knight takes a4. Because if they play knight takes a4 in this position, this is very principled. Like knight takes a4, b takes a4, we've exchanged off those knights. But more importantly, now what is this rook even doing? This rook doesn't make any sense on the e1 square. It's actually wasted a pretty important tempo, and it's going to have to just kind of travel back to d1 in a couple of moves. Like, for example, rook g2, queen c5, rook is going to need to go back to d1, and then rook h6. And actually, black is doing really, really well here. Black is actually completely equal at this point. Black has managed to completely equalize the position because all of his pieces are active, and white had to waste several tempo playing rook e1 and then rook back to d1. And those two tempo are really, really critical in these types of positions. If you can gain a tempo or two in these very, very sharp bishop g5 lines, it makes all the difference in the world. It's the difference between your position being fundamentally sound and losing by force. And, so a sample line would be something like rook g8, e5, knight f5, rook f6, and everything is cool. And you're doing just fine here. And white would actually be forced to take a perpetual here, and everything would be fine. So why can't we just do this? This looks great. So there is a problem with this. So the main problem with this is if we play knight a4, we run into knight d5. So knight d5 against almost anything apparently just works here. So knight d5, the whole thing is if we play... we can't take it. If we take, e takes is really strong. We're basically losing in that position. So we're looking at either queen a7 or queen c5. And against either one, kind of just, something like queen a7, queen d1 is very strong. And there doesn't appear to be a great move here for black. If you want to try this position, go ahead. But it looks like this position is just major advantage white, and white is doing a-okay here. So the question becomes, okay, if knight a4 doesn't work, like what can we do? What can we try in this position? Well, another attempt is, I guess, instead of playing rook b8, you could try knight a4 right away. And this was one of my original ideas, was play knight a4 right away. And this may be reasonable. The computer assessment for it is pretty low. It says that black is going to be -2 for a pretty extended period of time. But it never has white quite dropping the hammer. So this might be worth a shot, like if you don't want to give up on the line. But the problem is, after knight takes a4, b takes a4, white is not losing these critical tempo on rook e1 to d1, and you're not going to be able to gain those critical tempo either. And actually, just trying to go down the main line, like say after king b1, we'll say rook b8, and then we'll say something like, even c3, we can't get away with the move rook h6 in this position because our queen is actually unfortunately placed on c7. So we could have like rook g8, e5, knight f5, rook f6, knight g7 check, and then this weird fork tactic actually works, forking the king and queen. And amazingly, that works. So we have to be more circumspect than that. We have to be more careful. We would have to play something like queen b6 just to get the queen off of that line. And then we would maybe continue with something like, instead of rook h6, which apparently still doesn't work, we would have to play e5 and then follow up with something like bishop e6 and go after the light squares. And then we've got some chance of counterplay here. But the assessment seems to favor white. So it looks like this position is probably better for white, although there's some play here, so maybe we have a shot. So if that doesn't work and rook b8 doesn't work, what are our alternatives? Well, our alternative is to play something like queen b6. And queen b6 kind of started taking over as the main line because it's really logically oriented. If rook b8 is running into the problem of rook e1 with the spread of knight d5 and we can't stop it, then queen b6 is really the most logical move, because queen b6 counters rook e1 really, really well. If now rook e1, we can actually meet rook e1 with this amazing, cool move that we really wanted to play. We can play knight d7, because again, general principles matter. We wanted to transfer this knight from c5 to d7, and queen b6 now facilitates that. The usual problem with playing the knight back to d7 is that the knight e6 move will come in with some serious effect, and we'll have issues. In this case, if they play knight takes e6, we have queen takes g1, and apparently black is actually coming out on top in these complications. After knight c7, king d8, knight takes a8, black is actually doing okay in these positions. Black is actually fine. A lot of this just has to do with the fact that the rook is on e1. If the rook were on d1, we would have more problems, because the rook would be anchored and bishop b5 would be a possibility. And more on that later. But basically, knight d7 followed by knight e5 should be slight edge black, and black should be okay here. So rook e1 doesn't work. So if rook e1 doesn't work, white has to play something more passive like king b1. So already it feels like we're making some sort of progress. And then we run into this game that continued with b4, a b4, queen b4, and then we have rook g7. And now it looks like every single attempt in this position kind of fails. There's so many things that we can try, and it doesn't seem like anything works. So one of the things that we can try is we can try knight to d7 in various locations and see if we can transfer that knight to e5, because that's what general principles teaches us. Can we transfer this knight to e5 at any point? So if we go back, we can try it in lieu of b4. We can play knight to d7, and for the most part, at first, it looks like this is potentially a really good idea. Like we can meet knight takes e6 with queen to g1, but now knight c7, king d8, knight takes a8. When we play bishop b7, they have the move bishop takes b5, because now this rook is in fact anchored. And this is an unclear position, but it seems like the complications favor white. Like knight e5, queen f5, we would have queen c5, and then after bishop e2, bishop takes a8, black would be totally equal if it wasn't for this move knight a4. And then, unfortunately, I think black is significantly worse, because we would have to play queen a5 before, and then after this exchange, black isn't left with his powerful knight on e5, which can hold the position together, and that's kind of a serious problem. So this position is probably major advantage white, and would be nearly impossible for black to hold. So, going back, we need to decide, is there a possibility of playing knight d7 in other locations? People have tried at various points to play knight d7. Notably, there was a game where somebody tried to play it right away, and they got away with it in Bajrania versus Rasulov, played in Baku in 2011. Black actually ended up winning the game because white responded poorly. But interestingly enough, again, the usual remedy could have been played here. White could have just played knight takes e6, and this should just be major advantage white after something like this. The computer just says, white is completely winning. And this is the usual type of remedy in these positions with early knight d7s, is to play something like knight e6. And that's the reason that we're trying to preface things with the move queen to b6. So we're going to have h5, a3, queen b6. And so now we have, again, king b1, and we know knight d7 doesn't work, so we're going to try pawn to b4. A takes b4, queen takes b4, we're going to have rook g7, so knight d7 here. So this is another attempt, and this comes ridiculously close to working. Actually, knight e6, the normal remedy here, doesn't work. So if knight e6, we have a bunch of wild complications that seem to be incredibly unclear, but might even favor black with all of the stuff going on. Like after something like this, black has just as many threats as white, and the position is very, very unclear, and black is actually doing a-okay here. This position maybe even pitters out to just pure equality. Black is doing just fine. It's a highly complex position, and the computer can't make heads or tails of it, but black is doing great here. But again, the problem is there's an alternative to knight takes e6. There's this move rook g5. And this is a horrible move. I wish this move didn't exist. If it wasn't for this move, knight d7 would completely save this line for the black pieces, and black would be totally okay. But the whole point is we don't have the move knight e5 anymore. If we play knight e5 here, they have rook e5, d e5, knight c6. And we're losing. And we have not a whole lot else for other moves. If we play knight to c5, for example, just bringing the knight back, hoping for rook g7, rook g5 was significant progress. And after either knight on c to b5 or queen to e3, these positions should just be major advantage white. Shuffling our knight back and forth was not really a great plan for black in this position. So going back, we need to look at what else has been tried in this position. The main move that got tried was Rook b8, and unfortunately it runs into this really cool rejoinder move. It runs into Bishop b5, which cuts off the rook and the queen and prevents the checkmate on b2. And again, we don't really have a great move here. Actually, all of black's moves from here on out are pretty much forced. We would have to play Rook b5, and then knight takes b5, and then a takes b5. And then after e5, threatening queen c6, again, a very forcing move. We would have to play bishop b7 so we don't get mated, because queen c6 was actually a threat of mate. Queen to e3, and then, believe it or not, there's just not a whole lot better than what was played in the actual game where this was played. This was played in Belka versus Rosenberg, which again, Memento Mori gave this game citation. Thank you very much for that. This is going to be completely losing for black after the move that was played in the game, but there just doesn't appear to be a really good alternative. Queen c4 takes, b4, rook g5, knight d7, and after the exchange, black is completely losing because basically white just starts rolling the queenside pawns, and that's pretty much a wrap. So if all of this doesn't work, and we don't have knight d7 to e5 in any particular location that seems to work, I mean, what can we do? Well, there's been other attempts, but they're still they're having problems. There's rook b8 in this position, and there's a line with bishop h3 that seems to favor white. Interestingly enough, if bishop h3 doesn't favor white, probably pawn to b4 right away favors white as well. But we have pawn b4, knight d5, takes. This should be sufficient for major advantage white here. After b3, even bishop g4. In these exchanges, this position is hardly survivable, but we're getting into something where at least we have some complications. If, for example, if here they don't play king b2, you're doing okay if they play king a1. So like king a1, rook c2 is apparently really good for black. So there are some complications here, and there's some ways that white can at least go wrong. But apparently after king b2, the engine just seems to think that this is major advantage white, even after best play, which would continue with something like knight b3, rook e2, rook c4, a5, king back to a1, a4, queen g4, takes, and then queen e2, king over, and after all this, white should be completely winning. The bishop on f8 is not as strong as the rook on c1. So we're not in great shape here. So what's the final verdict on this? Do we absolutely need to give up on this line? I don't think we need to give up on this line quite yet. We don't need to give up on the whole line itself, but maybe the move h5 and then when white replies with a3 is a very serious problem for black. It doesn't seem like there's a good way to get an unclear position where we have lots of play with best play. It seems like white has somewhere between a slight advantage to a major advantage in pretty much all lines, even if we try all of these different alternatives where we try knight a4 in different places and knight d7 to e5 in different places, even though I think that these ideas should definitely be tried because they're very principled and they're worth a shot, it seems like white is coming out on top in all these lines. So what we need to do is we need to be principled maybe a move earlier. So really, I think the best shot to equalize, and it almost equalizes by force, is before they get a chance to b3, we need to play b4 before they are set up with something like, say, rook e1, and force that knight d5 move before it's clearly decisive. Because right now, knight d5 is not clearly decisive because there is no rook on e1. So on knight d5, we can take it. And then after e takes d5, we can shuffle this knight back, knight d7 to e5. Now, the overall assessment of this position is slight edge to major advantage white, but black's position is probably holdable. For example, knight c6, bishop b7, queen e4 check, knight e5, king b1. We would exchange, we would play queen c6, rook d5, and then the move that kind of gets played here is just castling out of everything. They take on e5, this exchange happens, and then there was an ICCF game between Cook and Blanco, played in 2007, that continued with the move a5, and black was able to hold a draw. Even though white is clearly better in this position, black has messier pawns, and, white has more space, and white has the safer king, there are the same number of pawns on the board, so black is not down material, and there are opposite colored bishops on the board. And that leads to a lot of drawing chances here. If we can simply activate our rooks, and we can exchange rooks, the opposite colored bishop endgame, regardless of the computer assessment, the computer can say +2 in the opposite colored bishop endgame. It'll still be a draw, and it'll say +2 till the end of time, but it'll still be a draw. So this is probably your best shot if you just want to continue playing this line as your main line. Unfortunately, this isn't what a lot of Najdorf players want. They don't want to scrap out into, a draw, if their opponent just happens to know all the theory, and then struggle to try to get that draw. So if you want to play a more exciting line, you're probably going to have to look at, playing some early alternative. You're going to have to look at playing an early queen c7, or you're going to have to look at playing an early queen b6, and playing either the poison pawn or playing the queen c7 lines. But these lines are by no means completely unsound. It's just that this is probably the path that we need to go down right now, because a3 is causing some serious problems. Hopefully the h5 line can be revived. There's nothing that I've been able to find that shows that black can create enough serious complications to justify the move at this point. But that doesn't mean that the move is completely dead, or that the move isn't playable for practical chances in a tournament game. If you really understand your theory and you really understand your ideas, and you're not playing against stockfish. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope Memento Mori thought that this was a good analysis and can really help him out. And I hope you learned something new about chess. Thank you very much for watching.